Two. We're up to the Mishnah on Daf Nun Bet Amud Bet.
Okay, I've gone way noon bet Amud bet. I went way past that yesterday, actually.
Okay, we'll go quickly because Rosen knows it's all from school, so it'll go fast. But it's important to do it all, of course. And today's is a very difficult daf, but we have very experienced learners, so we'll get there. Says
Right,
the
Rosa? You and I.
mitzvah nechnakim, the mitzvah of those who get chenek, those who get their chenek literally means strangled, right? So it says the Mishnah, what did you do? You'd put them into manure or some kind of dirt ad arkavotav up to their thighs or their knees so that they can't move. The notain sudar kashel haraka. They would put a hard scarf, rope, basically, inside of a soft one. The korich al tzavro, they would tie it around his neck. Each witness, as we learned before, would pull one from each side. Ad shet nafsho yotzeit, until he strangles and dies. It's pretty miserable. I'm sure the scene was very unpleasant, and that's what happened. Says the Gemara, Tana Rabbanan. Where do we know this from? It says the Braita. It doesn't say anywhere in the Torah that you do chenek on anyone. It never says that. It says that ish asher. I'm going to read the whole pasuk, even though I don't have it. Do you have pasukim? Ish asher yinaf et eshet re'eyo. Right, a man who is yinaf, he has adultery, I guess. I don't know how yinaf he sleeps with the wife of his friend. That's a problem. You kill them, right? It says mochumat. So now let's darshan that. Says the Braita. Ish prat lekatan. A minor does not get killed. Of course, it's very problematic why you would need a pasuk to exclude a minor. But for tonight, we're not going to have time to talk about it. Maybe tomorrow. Asher yinaf et eshet ish, who sleeps with eshet ish. Sorry, this pasuk is eshet ish. Prat eshet katan. Not if he's a wife of a katan, because a katan cannot have kiddushin. And so if a 8-year-old marries a woman and someone else sleeps with that woman, that's not eshet ish. Then it says eshet re'ehu. That tells you probably eshet achirim. That excludes someone who is a wife of achirim. Achirim here means a non-Jew. Okay, a non-Jew is not considered marriage. Anyways, if the person's married and you sleep with her motumat, you kill that person. Says the Braita b'chenek, by strangling them. Continues the Braita, maybe it's some other thing. Torah never says chenek. Torah says you stone someone. Torah says motumat. We talked about saif yesterday. Torah says sreifa, right? That never says chenek. So how do you know it's chenek? Says the Gemara, because the Torah just says kill them. You can't do something that's harsher. You have to do the least severe killing, right? El hakel Divrei Rabbi Yoshaya. That's what says Rabbi Yeshaya. This is the least severe killing you can do for a person, and therefore, because it's mekel from all the other ones, from skila, sreifa, hereg, that's why you do chenek. Rabbi Yonatan says, well, nobody shikala. It's not because it's kal, as we're going to see, because remember there's a machloket last week about what's the most kal, and he holds that hereg actually is more kal than chenek. So it's not because it's kal. Ella kol mitam rabbatar stami no chenek. Stam meat in the Torah means chenek. We'll ask in a second how you know that. Says Rebbe, how you know that? Rebbe Omer, because nemar mita b'dei shamayim. Because it talks about God killing people, right? There's plenty of times where it says Hashem will cause someone to die, but we don't carry out that punishment. And it says nemar mita b'dei adam. Ma mita amura b'dei shamayim. Now, when God kills somebody or causes someone to be killed, you can't tell. They die, right? They get sick, they die. They passed. It's not like they, of course, they can die many ways, but natural death, as we put it, looks natural, right? Just like the death that happens with Shamayim, Ein Bo Rosham, there's no physical necessary impact externally on the person, right? So too, Afmita Amura B'dei Adam, Mita She'ein Bo Rosham. So too, when we talk about a human death, it means a death that has no visible impact. Hi Robert, I know we started early, because we're in a rush, but we're at the last line of Daf Nun Bet Amud Bet. And the question is, when the Torah says you kill someone for adultery, how do you know it's through strangulation? Maybe it's something else. So Rabbi Yeshaya now has this great proof, Rabbi Yonatan, and Rabbi Yonatan. And Rabbi Yudan Nasi explains that we learn from Mita B'dei Shamayim that stam, when someone dies, they die without any visible impact on their body. So too, when you kill them, you don't have a visible impact on their body. Of course, if you stone them, there would be a very visible impact. And if you cut off their head with a sword, that would be visible. So therefore, those two are off the books. Now, the Gemara asks in a second, what about burning someone? Burning does not seem to be visible. Now, if you didn't come to Daf the last few days and you don't know how we burn somebody, you might think, what do you mean? Burning seems very visible. But if you recall, the burning is done internally. So if the burning is done internally by putting lead down their throat or metal, so ask the Gemara now in the last line, yeah, but you don't see it outside. I mean, of course, if you strangle somebody, there's clearly, their eyes pop out and things happen. It's not like nothing happens, but I guess it's not as visible as stoning or.
Doesn't it just burn through your flesh and like you
It burns internally. No, I think you die before it comes out of your body. I don't exactly
still
know.
burns your flesh?
You don't see it on the outside. No, they put it in your mouth.
It's very fast. That's one
yeah.
of the reasons that they felt that it was like actually a kind type of death.
Kind as opposed to burning someone on the stake. Kind of.
Right, exactly.
Right, yeah,
It was like
yeah.
that was an agonizing kind of death when they put
Right.
them up this. Yeah.
Right.
Anyway.
Says the Gemara now, the last line of Amos Sreifa. So maybe when the Torah says kill someone, it means Sreifa. Says the Gemara, it's true. But if you remember, what case are we talking about? We're talking about Eshet Ish, about adultery. And if you recall, the Torah very specifically tells you that if you sleep with the daughter of a Kohen, then you get Sreifa. Clearly, everyone else doesn't get Sreifa. Right? It says the Gemara, Midam Rachman abat Kohen b'Sreifa, Michlal, Dehu, Deha, La bat Sreifa. It must be that regular, quote unquote, adultery without a bat Kohen.
I'm sorry,
Doesn't
what's Sreifa?
Sreifa is burning. And as we said before, the way they burnt someone was not by burning them on the stake or burning them body externally. They would burn them internally by pouring boiling metal, liquid metal down their throat, which is a pretty miserable way to be killed, but it's very, very fast. So that's how we, quote unquote, burn someone. So says the Gemara now, top word now of Daf Nun Gimel Amud Aleph, just in time for James. Bishma the Rabbi Yonatan explained how I know that there's such a thing as chenek, because there has to be a way to kill someone. Kid mefarish taima, kid dekam mefarish Rebbe ta'ama. El Rabbi Yoshaya, who says that the reason we give chenek to a woman or a man or a woman who commit adultery is because we want to give the most light mita, and it's the less than the other three, skila, sreifa, and hereg. But how do you even know it exists? How do you know there are 4 options? Maybe there's only 3 options. The Torah never says chenek. How do you even know it's on the list? Amos Sayef, Amar Rava, because you're right. There has to be a tradition. Arba mitot gemara gemiralu. We have a tradition that there are 4 methods of mitat beitin, and we know about 3 of them. This must be the 4th one, and it's the most kal of the 4. My lo mipnei shikala. Now, what does it mean when Rabbi Yonatan said back to Rabbi Yeshaya, "Oh, it's not the most kal"? Says Gemara, because kamiflagi plukta to Rabbi Shimon Rabbanan. They're arguing about the machlokah we had previously of Rabbi Shimon and Rabbanan about what the order is of severity. According to Rabbi Shimon, skila, not skila and sreifa, that was a different machloket, but hereg and chenek, the machloket was which one was more strict, and clearly Rabbi Yeshaya holds that it's worse, it's stricter to give sayef than to do chenek, and according to Rabbi Yonatan, it's the opposite. Amar le Reb Zera le'Abaya. Now Reb Zera says something to Abaya, which is going to strike you if you haven't learned the daf for tomorrow already as being way out of make no sense. So very briefly, and I promise we'll continue this tomorrow if you join us at 7:45 a.m. The Torah, we're about to start talking about a topic that is very complicated in the Torah, which is the punishment and the prohibition of sleeping with people you're not allowed to sleep with. Let's leave it to that. And we're going to talk about all the mitot that they get, right? Most of them we're going to see in a second get skila, many don't. We'll talk about it all. But the principle that we have in the Torah is that we only punish someone. If you remember from Sefer Vayikra, there's a whole list of arayot in Parshat Achremot. And then there's a whole list of arayot in Parshat Kedoshim. And of course, everyone has had the fun activity of trying to compare those lists and see what's the same and what's different and what's left out, consumed rabbis for years, I would say, and us too. But the reason that that's done is that the principle is that we always have, by arayot, we always have an azhara and an onish. You have a warning, don't sleep with this person. And then the Torah separately says, and if you do, you get this punishment. And the rule that we're going to have is that you don't punish someone unless you also have an azhara. I mean, you have to have both psukim. The Torah just says a person who sleeps with their mother gets killed. That's not enough. It has to say, don't do it.
And you have to accept it also.
Correct. And you also have hatra and all of that. But this is referring to the psukim. Now, that's very important. We'll see why in a second. The second fact that you need to know for the rest of today's daf is that the Torah very rarely tells you how to kill a person, right? It often says, mot yumtu, you kill them, but it very rarely says how to do it. So we're going to learn in a little bit that we do a hekish. We compare one, Torah says motium 2 by one thing, and you get that punishment. So 2 by the other thing, okay? So when it comes to skila, the next Mishnah, which you're going to have to wait 10 minutes to see, gives a list of the niskalim. But the Torah only says skila by 5 people. It says skila by Oved Avodah Zarah, by Mikalel, someone who curses, by Shabbos, thank you, by, I'm missing a 4th one, Nara Marasa, and Ben Sorer More. Okay, so those are the 5. I think I might be wrong, but those are the 5 where the Torah says it. But there are many more cases. So how do you know those other cases? So we're about to ask a question about there's 2 words that might 2 possible sources for comparing the known to the unknown. One is the word mot yum tu, which is repetitive. It says you will surely die, which sounds double, and the other is dmehem bum, right? Which seems to just say dmehem, you kill them, but why say bum? Or Demei. So now, that's the background. Says the Gemara now, as if you know that all background, 5th line from the top. Amar le Rabbi Zera le Abaya. So Rabbi Zera walked into the Beit Midrash one day and said to Abaya, listen, Abaya, you're going to see this is a setup, obviously. Shar haniskalim, the loktiv b'hu skila, right? All of the niskalim, where it doesn't say skila, right? Oh, sorry. I guess I added one. I take it back. I missed the most important one. It doesn't actually say skila by Ben Sorer Moreh. That got me confused. The 5th case is not Ben Sorer Moreh. We'll get there. The 5th case is Oven Yidoni, okay, which is the critical one. So the 5th case where it says skila is by sorcery, right? So says Reb Zera to Abaya, you and I both know, because we learned the Gemara, that all of the other cases of niskalim are derived from Oven Yidoni. Oven Yidoni had said, don't do it. If you do it, you'll get killed. You get killed by skila. Everything else that we learned skila, it says, don't do it, you'll get killed. And we learned that you get killed means the same thing. But ask Reb Zera to Abaya, Shar niskalim de'oktivu skila de'gamrime Oven Yidoni. All the times where it doesn't say skila, but we derive it from Oven Yidoni, b'mai gamri. Which word from Oven Yidoni is extra to derive it from? Is it the word motium tu, right, gamri? Oh, Dmeim Bum Gamri. Is it from the fact that it says Motium 2 by Oven Yidoni and by things like Ben Sorer Moreh? Or is it because it says Dmeim Bum? So Amarle, so Abaya answered, Rabbi Zera, oh, it's Bidmehem Bum, or Dmehem Bum, right? It could have just said Bidmehem. It says Dmehem Bum. So we learn out from the repetitive word there, Gamri. Now, answered Abaya, because if we had learned it out from Motium 2, then what would I do with the word Dmehem Lamali? Why would I use the word Dmehem Bum, which is repetitive? What would I do with that? So therefore, that's what Dmehem is there to tell you. There's something special about Oven Yidoni that they get skila. Every other time where it says Dmehem Bum, you also get skila. Says the Gemara, Abaya, that's a great answer, but how does that make any sense, right? There's 2 extra things. You're saying we learned from one, because otherwise what would we do with the extra words? But what would we do with the other extra? Elamai Dmehem Gamri. So you have to say, Abaya, that you learn out from Dmehem, but Motium 2 Lamali. So why do you need the words Motium 2? Why do you have to be repetitive with the Motium 2? Says Abaya, well, that's simple. Kiditanya is because the Braita that we had earlier, we had it last week, it says Motiumat Hamaker Rotseachu. Right? It says by killing, you kill the murderer, you punish the murderer and kill them. Remember, the punishment for murdering another person is sayif. But it says mot yumat, says the Braita we had last week, I only know that you have to kill them the way the Torah said it, which we learned yesterday means cutting off their head. Let's say you can't cut off their head, you don't have a sword, or they have a very thick neck, let's say. That Beit Din has to fulfill it another way, meaning we ideally should do saif, but if saif is not possible, you have to burn him or skila or whatever. Talmud lomar mot yumat hamakeh mikom makom. Therefore, it says mot yumat hamakeh mikom makom, and therefore the word mot yumat tells you make sure they're really killed, even if you have trouble doing it the right way. Yeah. So now the word mot yum tu by Oven Yidoni is telling you the same thing. Oven Yidoni is supposed to get skila. Let's say you don't have any stones to do skila. You don't have a high cliff to throw them off. Whatever reason, you have to kill them however you can. So mot yum tu is to tell you do it and make sure it gets done. The Dmehem Bum is there to tell you this is extra. And anytime the Torah says Dmehem Bum, most times you get skila. Okay, so that was Abaya's answer to Rebbe Zera. Now says the Gemara, asked Rav Acha Midifti Ravina when he heard the story and said to him, like you would have also said, there's a lot missing in this story. Why was Rabbi Zera asking Abaye the question? Right? Anytime you walk in and ask someone a question, there's always a deeper meaning or an ulterior motive, right? So clearly, Reb Zera was saying to Abaye, now the Gemara assumes this, Reb Zera was saying to Abaye, do you learn it out from the words Motium tu or Dmei Bam? And Abaye answered, oh, I learned it out from the words Dmei Bam. And Reb Zera never said any more questions. But clearly, according to what we're assuming, if Abaye had answered the other way and said, oh, you learn it out from Motium tu and Dmei Bam is extra, Reb Zera was about to jump down his throat. So asked Rav Acha Midifti, the Ravina, generations later, Ibe Motium tu Gemira, right? Let's say Abaye had answered the opposite. Abaye had answered that the way we compare things to Oven Yidoni is through the words Motium tu, right? So what would have been the problem? What was Reb Zera about to ask? My kakashale. What would have been the question of Reb Zera about the Mayim Bam? Says Rav Acha Midifti to Ravina, maybe Ilema Eshet Ishkat Kashale. Right? Maybe his question would have been, it says the words Demehem Bam by Eshet Ish. So why don't you learn Eshet Ish from Oven Yidoni and give skila? Right? So Lemeti Veligmar Motu, sorry, it says the words Motumat, right? Lemeti Veligmar Motumat me Oven Yidoni. Why don't you take the words Oven Yidoni, which it says by Eshet Ish, and say, oh, by Eshet Ish it says Motumat. By Oven Yidoni it says Motumat. There you get skila. Ma lahalan b'skila, avkam b'skila. Just like there you get skila, here too you get skila. So if Abaye had answered that the way we know that skila is generalizable is through the words motumat, Rav Zera was about to jump down his throat and say, well, then why doesn't Eshet Ish also get skila? Says Ravina, that's not a question at all. Because Eshet Ish can't get skila. Why can't Eshet Ish get skila? Because of Na'ara Murasa. Right? The Torah says that if the woman, the married woman you slept with was a Na'ara Murasa, you get skila. So clearly, every other Eshet Ish doesn't get skila. Lav says the Gemara, that can't be possible. Mid'amar Achmana Arusa b'skila. Since the Torah said that a woman who's an Arusa, who has adultery, gets skila, Michlal dinisua lav b'skila. So that wouldn't have been a question. Even if you learned out skila from the word motumat, and it says motumat by Eshet Ish, you still wouldn't learn skila. Okay, says the Gemara, you're right, but makeh aviv imoka kashile. He would have asked the question from the case where a person hits their mother or father, right? If a person hits their mother and father, they get killed, and the mita that they get killed with, we're going to learn later, is chenek. They get strangled. But it says they're motumat. So we would have said, the meti v'ligmar mi oven yidoni. Why don't you derive that, a punishment for a person hitting their parents, from oven yidoni? And says, because oven yidoni says motumat, and motumat means skila. So too, by hitting your parents, it should be skila. So answers the Gemara, but it's true that you would have asked that question, but it's not a good question because we just told you that Eshet Ish says motumat and you get chenek. Now, if you have two sources to learn from, you can't learn from the stricter one. You have to go to the lighter one. So if it says the words motumat by hitting your parents, and it says the words motumat by skila and motumat by chenek, the one you have to learn it from is chenek. You can't go to the stronger one. You have to go to the lighter one. So it says the Gemara, "Adagami me oven yidoni," or you ask me a question. Why did I derive it from oven yidoni? Ligmur me Eshet Ish. I would learn it out from Eshet Ish. You're not allowed to go and be stricter about something. You have to be lighter about something. So said Rav Acha Midifti to Ravina, I don't understand what Rav Zera was asking Abaye. Right? Because no matter what Abaye would have answered, even if Abaye had answered, it came from Motimat, so what? Why does it matter? Turns out he comes from Demehem Bam. But why would it matter? Said Ula, no, it does matter. Amar Lei, because it's Shara Niskalim Gufayo Kakashale. His question would have been about every person who gets skila we're about to mention in the Mishnah. Because if you have two psukim that say the word Motumat, one is by Oven Yidoni where it says skila. One is by Eshet Ish where we know it can't be skila because Nara gets skila, so it must be chenek. Then every single time where the Torah says motumat, you couldn't learn out skila. So all the cases that, like Ben Sora Amora, to pick one that I should have said before, or Michashev, and the ones we're about to list in the Mishnah, or someone who sleeps with their mother. All these cases which we're about to have should get chenek, not skila, and that would have been the question. If the source was the words mot yumat from Oven Yidoni, then we would have asked Ad Degami Oven Yidoni the Gmur Me'eshatish, and that would have been a good question. So it's a good thing that Abaya understood Reb Zera was asking that question, and he answered that the source is the words Demehem Bam, and of course it doesn't say Demehem Bam by Eshatish, and therefore any time where it says Demehem Bam, not any time, but most times where it says Demehem Bam, we derive from Oven Yidoni that the punishment is skila. And on that note, says the Mishnah, we are at the second wide line. Elohein aniskalim. These are the people who get skila. Here's your list. Habal aim. I gave that example. Someone sleeps with their mother, or Eshadav, a father's wife, even if it's not your mother, right, is prohibited for Torah says. So that's an Isser skila. Vala kala, someone sleeps with their daughter-in-law. Vala zachar, or a man. Vala behima, or an animal. And that's true about a male. And the same thing is true about a woman. A woman who sleeps with an animal causes the animal to sleep with her. Is the meviat behima. And migadef, which is one where it actually says in the Torah skila. And oved avodat kochavim, where it also says skila. Vanotin zaro lemolach. Rashi points out that, interestingly, and we'll see this in the Gemara, that the Tana of our Mishnah does not consider molech to be avodah zarah, because otherwise it would have been included in what we just said. So molech is some other, worship that's not the category of avodah zarah, but that's also Torah says you get skila. Ubal ovi yidoni, which is the prototype, a person who goes to these sorcerers and witches. V'hamichalel the Shabbat, what Torah also says skila. V'hamichalel avivimo, not hitting but cursing, which is worse in punishment than hitting. V'haba on nara murasa, which of course is well known, right? This person sleeps with a nara murasa, and a mesit, someone who convinces other people to worship avodah zarah, or mediach, someone who convinces a whole town to worship avodah zarah, v'michashef, and a sorcerer, which is somehow different than Oven Yidoni, ben sorer umoreh. In the 10th case, I think we're up to 10, is a ben sorer umoreh. Okay, now we're going to, of course, discuss all of these. Ben sorer umoreh gets its own parak, right? We're going to get all of these in as we go for the next couple of weeks. But says our Mishnah, let's talk about the first one. Haba ala'im, a person who sleeps with his mother. Now, very often a person's mother is married to his father, right? And there's a prohibition of aim, and there's a prohibition of eshet aviv. Says the Mishnah, chayav alav mishum aim mishum eshet av. The person is chayav twice. Now, if you recall, we really can't kill a person twice. It's very challenging, right? So what this clearly means, as we're going to see in the Gemara, is for karbanot. If you do something that's a chayav mitah, if you did on purpose, if you do a b'shogeg, you bring a karban chatat. If you do something that's two actions, you could bring two karbanot. So a person who forgets that you're not allowed to sleep with your mother and father's wife, sleeps with her, whatever the case might be, has to bring chatat twice. Rabbi Yehuda says no. Says Rabbi Yehuda Omer in chayav achat el mishum ha'im bilvad. You're only chayav for one because it's your mother. You're not chayav for the second prohibition. Now we'll see why in the Gemara. Habal eshadav. Now, a person who sleeps with his father's wife, chayav mishum eshet av. Again, this is assuming it's not your mother, his mother, right? You're chayav for eshet av, but you're also chayav mishum eshet ish, because she's married to your father. Now, that's of course only true if she's still married to your father. If your father dies, or if the father gets divorced, you're not chayav mishum eshet ish.
True.
But says the Mishnah, even if a person's father dies, they are chayav for sleeping with his father's wife, even if he's dead. Because bein b'chaya aviv, bein lachar mitat aviv, whether his father's alive or his father's dead, bein min ha'erisin, bein min ha'nisuin, whether his father had erisin or nisuin, he's chayav because once his father married her, she's eshet aviv, and for her whole life he can never sleep with her. Okay, continues.
It happens in movies.
It happens in movies. Okay, continues the Mishnah. Haba al kalato. If someone sleeps with their daughter-in-law, then chayav la mishum kalato mishum eshet ish. The same thing.
Which movies?
Will be in the chat. But and the same thing is true about a daughter-in-law. If the son dies or divorces the daughter-in-law, those are things there's movies too, then your chayav still bein b'chaye beno, bein la'achar mitat beno, whether the son's alive or the son is dead, bein min ha'erisin, bein ha'nisuin. Okay.
But for the your stepmother, if she marries someone else, does she lose the status of your stepmother?
No, I mean, it's not, you're using stepmother, but she might lose your status of stepmother, but she's still prohibited from the pasuk of Eshet Aviv. Now, I'm going to do this very quickly. I apologize that we don't have more time because this could take 2 weeks. But I'm going to read the psukim to you because they're very important in Achrimot and in Kiddushim, and they're also very short. So in Parshat Achrimot, this is in Parak Yud Chet Pasuk Zayin, it says the following: Ervat avicha Ve'ervat imcha lo tegale. Don't reveal your father or mother's erva. Imcha hi, she's your mother, lo tegale ervata. Okay, that's one pasuk. That's the whole pasuk. In Parsha Kiddushim, in Parak Chaf, somewhere along the way, it says the following. Listen carefully. It says, Ish, this is Parak Chaf pasuk Yud Aleph, Ish asher yishkav et eshet aviv, a person who sleeps with his father's wife, ervat aviv gila. Mot yumtu, shnehem demehem bam. Okay, now you know, because of the word demehem bam, that it's skila. But what you probably notice from the pasuk is that it doesn't mention a person's mother. It just says eshet aviv in the onesh. In the azhara, in the warning, it says both. Okay, what you also remember, and it's very important today, is that it says ervat avicha, and we have no idea what ervat avicha is. What does that mean, ervat of your father? Does that mean the wife of your father? Does it mean you can't sleep with your father? So that's a question, right? So let's now, with that those two psukim in mind, read our Gemara. Tanya. It says the Gemara 5 lines from the bottom. Rabbi Yehuda said in our Mishnah, Im lo hayta imoru, this is not our Mishnah, sorry, this is the Braita. Im lo hayta imoru yala aviv eno chayv al mishum ha'im bilvad. If a person's mother was not allowed to marry his father, but did, they got married, let's say they're prohibited to each other, they got married, and they had a child, this person, then he slept with his mother, he's only chayav for his mother because it's not really his father's wife, because they're not allowed to get married, okay?
Valid.
Now, says Gemara, what does that mean? What does she mean he can't get married? It's his sister, or it's his whatever, someone you can't marry min haTorah, then who's Rabbi Yehuda arguing with? How can Rabbanan say that even though they couldn't get married, it's considered his father's wife? You can't marry someone who's an Isser Karet or an Isser Mitat Beitin. Ella must be Chayvin Lavin. Someone whose mother couldn't marry, his father wasn't allowed to marry. Let's say his father was a Kohen and his mother was divorcee. Very simple case, right? So they're not allowed to get married. It's an Isser Lav, it's not an Isser Karet. They got married. They didn't know, whatever. They got married. They had a wedding. They invited all the guests. They had a child. The child slept with his mother. So there, Rabbi Yehuda says, "Oh, you're only chayav mishum aim, not mishum eshet aviv." Rabbi Yehuda suffer like Rabbi Akiva, because Rabbi Yehuda holds like Rabbi Akiva. Damar ein kiddushin topsim b'chayvei lavin. Rabbi Akiva holds like the opinion. Rabbi Akiva holds the opinion that Rabbi Yehuda now adopts, that you cannot have kiddushin by a person who is the Isser Lav. Remember, we discussed in Yevamot very extensively that according to the and in Kiddushin elsewhere, that the Chachamim hold that you can, that you're not allowed to, but you can, you're married, right? And so therefore, Rabbi Yehuda holds that you're not married, and therefore there's no Eshet Aviv. The Chachamim hold they are married, so it is Eshet Aviv, even though it's prohibited. Okay, very straightforward. But says Rabbi Shaya in the last line, what's Rabbi Shaya? What about the Braita that we quoted many, many times in starting in Masechet Yevamot? Right? Says the Braita the following. Let's say a woman is widowed, her husband dies without children, and her husband had a brother. But she should fall to Yibam, but her husband was prohibited to her. He was either an Isser Mitzvah, a person who was Asr from a Mitzvah, or Isser Kiddusha. We'll see what those were in a second. Then says the Braita, Rav Shai is quoting, Choletzet lo mityavemet. You do Chalitza but not Yibam, right? Now, remember, we discussed in Yevamot, the reason you don't do Yibam is that even though Aseh is Docha Lot Aseh, and you could do Yibam, that's only for the first time you sleep with her. We're afraid that once you do Yibam, you're going to fall in love, you're going to stay with her, and therefore we say, do Chalitz, okay? Now, continues the Braita in Yevamot, Isser Mitzvah, what's an Isser Mitzvah? Shniot Midivrei Sofrim, a person you're not allowed to marry Midrabanan, remember, like a grandmother, etc., okay? People who were, not his grandmother, anyways, people, wife's grandmother, anyways, people who were prohibited only midrabanan. And amai karle isur mitzvah, the reason we call it isur mitzvah is shemitzvah l'shma divrei chachamim, because it comes from a source of a mitzvah to listen to the rabbis. And isur kedusha is an amanah kohen gadol. Isur kedusha is an isur lo taseh of the Torah, which says a divorcee cannot marry a kohen gadol or a grusha b'chaldutza lekohen hedyot. And amai karle isur kedusha, the reason we call it isur kedusha is because the Torah says about kohanim kedoshim yiyu lelohem. Right, they have to be holy, and they can't do all these things. So doing these things is a prohibition of their holiness. Okay, now that so far does not bother anybody. It's an Isser Lo Taseh. The Braita says, right, you're not allowed to do Yibam, but you can do Chalitza, which implies that we consider it to be a real marriage of, say, the Kohen to the Grusha, which is what the Chachamim say, that if it's not an Isser Karet or an Isser Mita Beitin, then even though you're not allowed to marry them, if you do it, you're married. The problem now is that we have Tanya Allah, we have a commentary on this Braita from Rabbi Yehuda. And Rabbi Yehuda says, Machlif chalufi. You know, I don't think you understand Isser Mitzvah and Isser Kedusha the right way. Switch it around. Isser Mitzvah is actually the Grusha, the Kohen Hadyot. Isser Mitzvah is actually the Shniot. Did I say it the wrong way? Yeah, the wrong way. The other way. Isser Kedusha is actually the Shniot. Isser Mitzvah is actually Grusha, the Kohen Hadyot. But you got it backwards, okay? But says the Gemara, but Rabbi Yehuda just told us that if you do an Isser Lav, you're not married. So if you're not married, if the Grusha was not married to the Kohen Hadyot and the Kohen died, why would the brother do Yibam or Chalitza? Right? He should not do anything. They were never married. So ask the Gemara, Tanya, Rabbi Yehuda Machlif Chalufi. Now, Machlif, period. Chalufi hu demachlif. He switched around the understanding of the words Kiddusha and Mitzvah. But ha-Chalitza, boy, he said you still need to do Chalitza if, for example, a Kohen married a divorced woman and then died. Isa Kadaitach Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Akiva Spirle. If Rabbi Yehuda holds like Rabbi Akiva, Michti, Chaybe Lav and Rabbi Akiva, Chaybe Kritotami. According to Rabbi Akiva, you treat an Isser Lav like Grusha, like an Isser Karet, like a sister or whatever, and Chaybe Kritot Lav and Chalitza V'Yibam Ninu. Right? Everybody agrees. Remember, we learned the first Mishnah in Yivamot, right? That there's 15 women who are pater the tzarot and tzarot because they weren't really married. Or they couldn't be married, let's say, right? So an Isser Karet is not a chiyuv of Yibam or Chalitza. It does not leave someone. So if Rabbi Akiva holds that a Chayve Lavin is like an Isser Karet, right, in this regard, and Rabbi Yehuda on Amud Aleph adopted the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, why in the world would a man, a Kohen, who married a Grusha and then died, why would his brother have to do Chalitza? Says, well, you're right. Of course, Rabbi Yehuda says you don't have to do Chalitza. All Rabbi Yehuda was saying is, you rabbis, who say Rabbanan, who say you have to do Chalitza, I just want to correct what the words Isser Mitzvah and Isser Kedusha mean. I'm editing you. I'm not arguing with you. The Dvarav, the Tanakama Kamer V'Leila Spirle. He said it like the Tanakama, but he doesn't actually hold of that opinion that you have to do Chalitza. Okay, so where we are, this is the easy part. We're about to get to the hard part of the daf. Okay, so where we are so far, Rabbi Yehuda says in the Gemara that if a man sleeps with his mother, who's married to his father, but the prohibition of marriage, they were not allowed to get married because, let's say he was a Kohen and she was a Grusha, then he only is chayiv one time for a Karban, let's say, because it's his mother, but it's not his father's wife. And the Rabbanan disagree because they hold that even though it's a Lotase, there's a marriage, and it's both, it's a father and a mother's wife. A mother and a father's wife, okay? But when Rav Dimi came down from Eretz Yisrael, Rav Yitzchak, came, he said, let me confuse everything. Kiata Rav Yitzchak, when Rav Yitzchak showed up from, usually Kiata means they came to Bavel from Eretz Yisrael, Tani, he learned the Mishnah completely differently. He said the following, Kiditznan. He said, in the case of our Mishnah, where a father was married to a mother, Rabbi Yehuda Omer Eino Chayiv Ela Mishum Ha'im Bilvad. Rabbi Yehuda says, even if they were married 100% legitimately, there was no prohibition. You had a father and a mother, they got married, they had a child. The child then slept with his mother. By mistake, he only brings one karban chatat, even though his mother was married to his father. So ask the Gemara, Taimamai, what in the world could be the reason for that? So Amar Abaya to Amar Kra, because the pasuk that I just read to you says, Imchahi. Right, I read you the pasuk. You're not allowed to sleep with her. It says extra words, imchahi, which tells you mishum imo atam mechayvo v'yatam mechayvo mishum eshet av, that if a person sleeps with his mother, who's also his father's wife, just look at the mother relationship. Imchahi, you're only chayav for mother. You're not chayav for eshet av. Okay. Now that's what Abaya said. Says the Gemara to this. That makes absolutely no sense. Because if you recall, I read to you the pasuk also of Ervat Eshet Avicha Lo Tegaleh, right? Don't sleep with your father's wife. Ervat Avicha Hi. So by your logic, I'm going to speak this outside because it's super confusing, and then we'll read it. By your logic, when it's saying Ervat Avicha Hi, it's saying if you sleep with your father's wife, who's also your mother, you're only chayav for the paternal relationship, for the father's wife. But now, if you take that one step further, it turns out that if you sleep with a woman who's your father's wife and your mother, you're not chayiv at all. Because the pasuk of Imchahi excludes the prohibition of the paternal relationship, and the pasuk of Ervat Avichahi gets rid of the prohibition of the maternal relationship. And so you would walk out of there saying, you're only chayiv if it's your mother and not your father's wife, or if it's your father's wife and not your mother. which obviously makes no sense. It can't be that sleeping with your mother who's your father's wife would be patur, right? So it says the Gemara, let me read that all inside. We are the second to last narrow line. Ella, says the Gemara, by your logic, imo she eshet aviv, right? If you have a woman who's your mother and your father's wife, like a normal marriage, and then you sleep with her. If you follow the logic, koi hacha, you would go to one pasuk, umimaitle, and you would exclude it from the paternal relationship, let's say. And then koi hacha, umimaitle, you would go to the other pasuk and exclude it from the maternal relationship and not be chayav. How could that be? Hashda, you'd have a situation where imo she'eno eshet aviv, if you have a mother who you sleep with who's not married to your father, you'd be mechayev. Right, you'd be chayav for sleeping with them. And eshet aviv she'eno imo, you would be mechayev. If a person was married to a father's wife, a stepmother, but not your mother, you'd be chayav. But now, second line, imo she'i eshet aviv lo mechayev klal. And then you're telling me that if it's your mother and your father's wife, and you sleep with her, you're not chayav at all. It's impossible. So clearly, if you take the word imchahi to exclude the other relationship, you have to take the word ervat avichahi to exclude the other relationship, and the whole thing falls apart. And furthermore, if you tell me that Rabbi Yehuda learns that from the pasuk imchahi, what do the Rabbanan do with that pasuk? The Rabbanan nam yachtiv imchahi. You still have to explain that pasuk. Ella, it must be, says the Gemara, that hahumi boile, that we actually need the pasuk imchahi, the kedar shisha b'ed Ravidi. You need it for Reb Shesha b'ed Ravidi. That's what the Rabbanan do with it. I'll tell you in a second what that is. But therefore, Rabbi Yehuda nami hahumi boile kedar shisha b'ed Ravidi. Rabbi Yehuda also needs that pasuk, and he doesn't have an extra pasuk of imchahi, and therefore that is not the source for Rabbi Yehuda's halacha that if you sleep with a mother who's your father's wife, you're only chayiv once. We'll get to a second what the source is. What's the halacha of Shisha b'ed Ravidi? We're going to get to it tomorrow, but I want to give you a tip off because the Gemara does. Shisha b'ed Ravidi is very bothered by the fact that I just told you what the problem was. The problem is that the Torah says don't sleep with your mother or your father's wife. And then the Torah says, if you sleep with your father's wife, you get killed. But it never says, if you sleep with your mother, you get killed. So Rav Shesha b'ed Ravidi is going to come tomorrow and tell me the word imchahi tells you that. Okay, we'll see why. We'll get there tomorrow, don't worry. Imchahi tells you that. So therefore, that's not what we need the imchahi for. So there's no source yet to say that if a man, sleeps with a woman who's his mother and his father's wife, he's only chayiv once. Ella, says the Gemara now on the fourth wide line, Amar v'achabrei Rav Ika, you know how you know it? It's because the pasuk says ervata. Ervata is singular. It's her erva, right? Amar ervata, which tells you you're only chayiv mishum erva achat ata mechayvo v'ata mechayvo mishum shtei ervot. Now, if you sleep with a woman, in this case your mother, who is also your father's wife, you are chayiv for one erva, not two. So you're chayiv for one, and we pick mother. I don't know why we pick mother, but we pick one. So you're not chayiv for two, and therefore that's how you know it. Says Gemara, that's ridiculous. What about the next psukim? Elamiyat, it says, ervat kalotcha lo tigaleh. Don't sleep with your daughter-in-law. Eshet binchahi, she's your son's wife. Lo tigaleh ervata. It's the same singular. So hachanami, you would say, let's say a person sleeps with his son's wife. Mishum erva achata tam mechayvo tam mechayvo mishum shtei ervot. But at the end of our Mishnah said, and this is why we're asking it, our Hanan Atznan, we learned in our Mishnah, haba al kalato chayiv le mishum kalato mishum eshetish. You're chayiv for two. You're chayiv for daughter-in-law and for married woman. Bein b'chayiv b'no, bein lachar mitat b'no, v'lo palig Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda didn't argue with that halacha. But your logic, every time it says ervata, it should be one punishment. Rabbi Yehuda doesn't seem to say that. Ella, it must be that, you know what, the word ervata means her erva, but it could mean many prohibitions. Even the chad gufahu, she's one person, meaning it's one event. Afagav the trei isurininu, even though you're over two prohibitions by sleeping with her, or many more sometimes, tiv ervata. It says the word her erva because it's one person. So that is not a good source. Okay? So we are right now stuck. How does Rabbi Yehuda, not Rabbi Yehuda that we quoted, but Rabbi Yehuda that Rabbi Yitzchak came down from Eretz Yisrael and quoted, say that if a person sleeps with his mother, who's his father's wife, that he's only chayiv once? Says the Gemara, we're going to do the last four lines, which you can see from Rashi are not the simplest lines. Ela Amar Rava, says Rava, this is the source of Rabbi Yehuda. Because Rabbi Yehuda holds, now this gets to what it's gonna be all of tomorrow's daf, not all, the first part of tomorrow's daf, first half. This pasuk that I skipped over, which turns out to be the key of this whole thing. The Torah starts off by saying, Ervat avicha ve'emrat imcha lo tigala. The erva of your father and your mother don't reveal, right? Ervat imchahi. What does it mean, ervat avicha? Says Rava, that's the key of Rabbi Yehuda, because it depends on how you understand ervat avicha. I'm going to tell you a lot of it outside. Again, tomorrow, actually, we'll read it all inside because it's really tomorrow's major daf. According to Rabbi Yehuda, the words ervat avicha do not mean don't sleep with your father. They mean don't sleep with your father's wife. So if ervat avicha means don't sleep with your father's wife, and ervat imcha means don't sleep with your mother, we then basically have an extra pasuk, essentially. It's really Gzera Shava, to compare a father's wife to a mother. And that's how we know that if a father's wife gets killed, that a mother also gets killed, or you get killed for sleeping with a mother. And therefore, when the Torah is talking now about a father's wife and talking about a mother, and then the next words are ervat imchahi, it's there to tell you, but it's only your mother who you get punished for if it's both, right? As opposed to where it says ervat avichahi later, it doesn't have a context of it's your mother and your father's wife, and therefore it's only one. So it's not that you learn out ervat imchahi means your mother and nobody else all the time. It's just the context, because here it said ervat avicha, meaning your father's wife, and ervat imcha, meaning your mother. Imcha is excluding your father's wife from punishment. Okay. However, the Rabbanan who disagree are of the opinion that ervat avicha does not mean your father's wife. It means don't sleep with your father. Right?
So
and there'd be two prohibitions. If a person sleeps with their father, they're chayiv for a zachar, which we had in the Mishnah, and they're chayiv for their father. So basically, that is the summary. There's a lot more that I'm skipping, but I'm going to do that summary, and let's read it inside. El Amar Rava, let's read that inside now. Because Savar Rabbi Yehuda is of the opinion that ervat avicha, when it says your father, it means zu eshet avicha. It means your father's wife. And therefore, Ma'tida b'gzera shava, we learn out of Gzera Shava comparing eshet avicha in the first case to eshet avicha by the punishment, right? Umashman, that would imply, when it says don't sleep with your father, meaning your father's wife, bein eshet aviv shehi imo, whether your father's wife is also your mother, which would be common, or bein eshet aviv she'eno imo, or your father's wife who's not your mother, right? And so how do you know imo she'eno eshet aviv minayin? How do you can't sleep with your mother who is not married to your father? Talmud Lomar. Therefore, the next words in the pasuk are ervat avicha. Then it says ervat imcha, your mother meaning only your mother. Lo tigaleh, right? Imchahi. And now that we're talking in context about a father's wife and a mother, imchahi is telling you mishum imat mishum eshet aviv. You're chayiv only for your mother and not your father's wife if she's both. According to the Chachamim, you don't say that, because according to the Chachamim, you don't need. It's not about the mother. It's not about the father's wife at all. And remember, we'll talk about this tomorrow, that the Chachamim use the word imchahi to tell you that there's a punishment for a mother. According to Rabbi Yehuda, I spoke it out a little bit, but we'll get to it tomorrow. The way you know there's a punishment by your mother, by a person's mother, is because since ervat aviv means eshet aviv, and there's another pasuk of eshet aviv, we have Gzera Shava from eshet aviv to eshet aviv. So we'll get to that tomorrow from the top word on Daf Nun Daled Amud Aleph. We will learn, God willing, tomorrow morning at 7:45 a.m. I hope everyone can join us. Shavua Tov.
Shavua Tov. Thank you.
I told you it's complicated, but we'll do it again tomorrow.
Thank you.
Okay, take care, everyone.
We'll see you at the funeral.
I'll see you at the funeral, James. But maybe I'll see you at Daf Yomi first.
Right.
Whose funeral is it?
Stuart Olson.
Oh, okay.
Stuart from HIR. James, you should join us first at Daf Yomi, 7:45. Just remember.
Always the ideal.
Always the ideal. Great. Have a good night.
Good night.